Hello everyone. Are you up for challenging the status quo by investing on a revolutionary technology? The technology behind this new app, it's breakthrough. We're still not sure about the monetization potential, but we will be working on it.
Hi John, are you ready?
Sure thing. Let me tell you about my research on the dairy business in the Middle East. Of the US, mainly due to distribution complexities.
I don't get it, John. Should we go on and invest?
So what do you think about these case studies?
Well, both ideas seem promising, but they didn't push the thinking far enough.
And focus heavily on showmanship, right?
Hi, what did you think of these presentations? Have you been in a similar situation before?
Whether you're used to present business ideas, or you think you might do that soon, this training is right for you.
Presenting a plan and having high energy when you communicate the message is critical, but having real impact on investors and senior management requires much more than that.
Senior executives expect you to present much more than facts and data. They expect you to present the rational implications behind a business idea.
They expect you to make the case.
I'm Dr. Esteban Rubin. Throughout my MBA in Kellogg and my years working in McKinsey, I have witnessed and crafted hundreds of business case presentations. When I founded my own consulting firm 15 years ago, I continued coaching top executives and entrepreneurs on the best ways to persuade relevant stakeholders to pursue their business ideas.
This training is the recollection of all of our experience. We won't teach you any theory, but rather provide you with concepts and exercises that work in real-life business. Some of our clients from Fortune 500 companies and private equity firms have already taken this training with excellent results.
We want you to craft a business case that is flawless in logic and structure. So get ready.
More than 100 exercises, questions, and examples that will enhance your learning experience.
More than 2.5 hours of video classes plus pre-reads for every module.
So if improving your persuasion skills is what you're looking for, then you should take this training.
Wait no longer to boost your career, and welcome to Make the Case. Very common to face a difficulty when it comes to Let's kick off this course by going over what it means to make a case. Make the case is presenting information and analysis that logically creates an argument and tells a story that supports a business decision, whether it is investing in a startup, deciding a go-to-market model, or aligning a budget location. Managers, CEOs, and investors expect you to make the case every time you present any type of information and analysis. This means they expect you not to present just nice slides, but rather to help them to make a decision. While attempting to make the case, you will typically encounter 3 different pain points. First, you will need to define the issue you're trying to solve and the game plan required to reach your target. It's very common to face a difficulty when it comes to linking tasks with the underlying problem that you're trying to solve. Second is actually executing the research and analysis to break through the problem. Usually, you may face discomfort whilst attempting to focus and prioritize efforts and managing trade-offs. The third common pain point is telling the story, which may lead to a failure to convey your case persuasively to your audience.
The objective of this course is to give you the tools that management consultants typically use to crack any case so that you can successfully navigate any business situation. Those tools will serve you in any kind of business presentation. We've seen amazing and instant improvement in executives from any business areas. from HR to marketing and finance. After the course, you will be able to first go from relying on templates that you're supposed to fulfill, for example, a business plan, to exploring and framing your idea, leveraging logical tools that will allow you to recognize the fundamental issue and develop a plan. Second, to go from executing quantitative analysis and research based on gut feeling to applying best practices on justifying research and quantitative efforts depending on the available resources. Third, to go from developing slides and presenting ad hoc analysis in a preset order, or no order at all, to learning how to envision the integration of slides and analysis in a logical structure to develop a deck that will allow you to persuade your audience.
Our first module will focus on defining the issue and the game plan. We will review logical structures to help us define the issue. Next, we will look to frame the problem to help us structure our hypothesis. And last, we'll learn how to develop and structure a work plan to carry the research and analysis needed. The second module will focus on executing research and analysis. We'll focus on both qualitative and quantitative methods and provide you with sample models for you to rapidly pick up on industry best practices. Our last module will be all about the art of storytelling. We will briefly review presentation best practices that range from storyboarding and slide writing to developing powerful executive summaries. We will end this lecture by providing some tips with regards to how to fine-tune your recommendations and manage the politics surrounding your presentations.
As we want to help you make the case in a systematic manner, we have framed all of these concepts into 7 comprehensive and iterative steps. As you begin to define your issue, you will create different hypotheses that will ultimately help you define your issue even better. Once you've cracked your issue and initial hypothesis, it is time to create your work plan and jump towards research and analysis. As you carry out your work plan, you will begin to build the structure of your presentation, which we call the storyboard. The storyboard of slides you create will change with the insights that research and analysis unearth, which will then affect the research that you do next. At this stage, we'll give you the tools to convey your story to any audience. We'll learn what an executive summary is and why it may be the most important piece of your presentation. Later, you will learn to fine-tune your recommendations and finally, plan your presentation accordingly.
Finally, this is a better representation of how we will move from an issue or problem all the way to the presentation. By mastering this 7-step process, you will learn the best industry practices and ace your presentations.
We began this course by saying that one of the main pain points in problem solving is to actually define the problem. Let's imagine that you want to implement a language training program for your team, or that your manager wants a price comparison analysis, or that you're raising capital from investors to enter a new market. Regardless of the scenario, you should avoid the trap of thinking that the third thought is the governing thought. Finding the governing thought is a task on its own, and it is the third step to make the case. And
how does the pyramid principle help us to unearth the governing thought? The key is applying the pyramid principle so that we transform the governing thought into the main hypothesis that can be broken down into different sub-hypotheses. This is what we call an hypothesis tree, because it begins from the most overarching hypothesis, the trunk of the tree, and cascades to less relevant ones in order of hierarchy, the branches of the tree. This is precisely how the pyramid principle works. We finally arrived to the aha moment of why the pyramid principle is so famous and appreciated. Because it transforms big and difficult questions to answer into tiny pieces that, in fact, are easy to answer. Well, maybe sometimes not so easy, but at least they are analytically doable. You have already learned the theory behind logical structures and how it applies to your business case. Our journey across the make the case process is taking off. On our next video, we will cover industry best practices on how to frame the problem. We will review why some frameworks are so famous, and finally, you will learn how you can leverage them to make the case. Have you ever heard the phrase, frame the problem? I guess so. But even though we have heard it 1,000 times, we hardly stop to think about what it really means to frame a problem. To frame the problem generally means to break it down to smaller pieces. Does that sound familiar? Effectively, this is the same thing you would do when you apply the pyramid principle. Even though you may break the problem into smaller pieces without applying the pyramid principle, In this video, we will understand how it helps you to frame the problem. Many times, governing thought, problem, and hypothesis are used as synonyms, and actually, they are. The only difference between them is how you voice your statement.
A good hypothesis tree has some of the following characteristics. Elements at a given level are made from elements from the previous level. Elements are clear, measurable, and can be delegated. Generally, there are 3 to 6 branches and in between 2 to 3 sub-branches. And the whole tree can be easily communicated. You may have heard the acronym MISI in different situations, and perhaps you know or have an idea of what it means, but we will work it out from scratch anyways. MISI stands for mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, and this concept of methodology will help you structure any issue that comes your way. When we are trying to be collectively exhaustive, the 80-20 concept is critical. This 80-20 approach embraces 2 rules. The first one states that, for many events, roughly 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. A popular application of this is that 80% of your sales come from 20% of your clients. The second use of the rule, and the most important one in this context, says that 80% is usually enough. This means that you can get 80% of the maximum possible results with 20% of the efforts by correctly prioritizing issues.
Established frameworks can help you to frame the problem without having to reinvent the wheel. Let's look at how our hypothesis tree can be turned into a framework. In our example, we were wondering if a certain industry is attractive. We could spend several meetings and working sessions trying to understand the underlying hypotheses that help us break down this problem. Or instead, we can benefit from one of the most well-known strategy frameworks, the Porter's 5 Forces. Michael Porter, one of the most well-known strategy professors, theorized that there are 5 forces that affect the attractiveness of any industry. Industry competitors, the threat of new entrants, the existence of substitutes, and the strength of both buyers and suppliers. As you can see in the slide, most frameworks have the pyramid principle embedded in its structure, even though its original format or layout might not look like that. For instance, Porter's circles resemble a planetary system and differ significantly from any pyramid. However, the fact of having one overarching statement and 5 underlying causes that somehow predict the result certainly portrays a pyramid principle structure. Once again, a framework is a pre-established conceptual structure that serves the purpose of breaking a problem into different pieces, or issue into sub-issues. There's no official list of frameworks, but the number of famous ones is already pretty large. Additionally, frameworks are not rigid. They can, and many times should, be expanded, changed, and combined to better suit the approach to the problem. In order to help you find the appropriate framework for your case, we will review 5 popular examples that are widely used. The Porter's 5 Forces, the PESTI analysis, the 4 Ps, the product life cycle, and the Swot analysis.
Let's take a closer look at Porter's model. This framework is used to understand if an industry is attractive or not. You should use it by assessing every description and turning it into a qualitative statement that allows you to judge
whether it contributes positively or negatively to an industry's attractiveness. As it usually happens with an inductive process, some aspects may be highly positive and others be sharply negative. Therefore, your recommendation should result from the relative weight of each branch. In summary, you should use Porter's framework when assessing whether to compete in a new industry. You should not use this framework to decide how to launch a product line extension, for example, as it would be too complex and you would not be facing the problem from the right angle. The PESTI framework is helpful to understand the key external environmental influences on a business. The acronym PESTI stands for political, legal, economic, socio-cultural, technological, and environmental. This type of analysis is useful to understand the overall picture of the context in which an organization is operating and is subject to. This framework is useful when a company is starting operations in new geographies or when conducting long-term analysis. It shouldn't be used, for example, to make the point that you need to restructure a department. The product lifecycle framework helps to identify how mature a product or service is, and according to its maturity stage, the competitive scenario and nuances that can be expected. You should use this framework when evaluating product portfolios or marketing investment mixes, and not, for example, when assessing market opportunities. The 4Ps is a helpful framework to make marketing cases, for example, when setting a value proposition. The 4Ps refer to price, product, place, and promotion, and each of them contains several items. Price includes payment period, terms, and discounts. Product encompasses quality, brand, and the product features. Place covers channels and shelf positioning. Promotion comprises advertising methods and messaging. This framework is great to convey how you are planning to win within a competitive situation and shouldn't be used to define, for example, if a product should be launched. The Swot analysis is another well-known and widely used framework. SWOT stands for the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that a company faces in any given scenario. This analysis helps assessing how a company can use its superior capabilities to capitalize on new opportunities while mitigating risks due to weaknesses and threats. It shouldn't be used, for example, to determine market attractiveness. If you wish to look for more tools to help you frame the problem and make the case, we recommend that you look into slidebooks.com or other framework libraries available online.
Now that we have defined the issue or governing thought, how do we turn it into a plan? After crafting your issue tree with an outline, messy set of hypotheses, it's time to understand what questions you need to answer to confirm, reform, or refute the hypothesis. Outlining these questions will help you to guide your analysis and focus on the most relevant issues. It's very important to understand the iterative nature of this process. As research and analysis are carried out, the relative relevance of each question may vary. Let's review a couple of examples to illustrate how it works. Let's go back to our case example and look at our initial hypothesis. There's a large market opportunity. To validate this, we need first to ask ourselves the questions that can help us conduct analysis in this direction. We should start with some obvious ones, such as how large is the market and what's the growth rate of the market. But as we go through those questions, we may feel forced to deepen our analysis to assess strategic issues, such as differentiation in customer needs. Examples of these questions may include: how is the market segmented? Up to what extent our customers value our differentiation? Is there any particular segment that values our differentiation the most? This will enable us to go further in the assessment towards sharper questions, such as how feasible is it to capture market share? Or we can dare to be more specific with the how can the market penetration evolve in the next 5 years? Now that we have outlined the questions, it's time to think what kind of tasks will help us to validate, reform, or refute our hypothesis. Wrapping up, as research and analysis are carried out, hypotheses are proved or disproved. This relates to the intrinsic nature of the inductive logic. Even though our main hypothesis, the competition is winning, may make you feel forced to provide a sure yes or no answer, at this point of the course, we know that those absolute truths may not convey a real picture and are not very useful in business settings. Hence, a most accurate answer will combine and ponder the answers of each sub-hypothesis, both rejected and validated. For instance, in this case, we could adjust our governing thought to something along the lines of: despite our brand strength, the competition is winning due to their lower prices and better distribution. And this is exactly the type of statement that reflects a pyramid principle logic and projects a sense of a robust case.
Our approach consists of 5 steps. First, look. Enumerate all the options you have to test each hypothesis, whilst being exhaustive in the combination of research and data analysis. Second, qualify. Assess the time and money investment required as an input, and the expected quality of the results of that input. Third, select. Based on the stage of the process and the scope of the project, select the best items and negotiate resources accordingly. Fourth, sequence. Plan how each item interrelates with each other, looking to identify the critical path to solving the main issue or problem. And 5, define. Set the dates to update all relevant stakeholders on process, progress, and content.
If you have correctly followed the issue definition, the hypothesis, and the game plan development phases, you have ended up with a set of activities that will help you confirm or refute the hypothesis of your case. However, understanding what the appropriate level of robustness your analysis should possess is not easy. Depending on the type of questions you're answering, business case analysis can vary considerably with regards to breadth and depth. And even though you want to provide a robust answer, business decisions should also be taken efficiently, and analysis cannot take forever to be good enough. As we have seen in Module 1, the basis of the pyramid, or the elements you want to present as the proof of your case, will be much stronger when they are based on research and analysis. This is what we call a fact-based analysis.
The role of this Make the Case module is to add a fact-based element to your case. And as you already know, fact-based analysis inevitably require data, which can come in many forms such as interviews, press clippings, databases, and others. To answer your case's questions, you will also need to process and analyze the data you gather, and eventually use the result of those analyses to feed additional hypotheses and analyses. You should follow this process until you have a set of data and analyses that support your case. This analysis could be complex, such as market sizing models or a target list for M&A based on prioritization criteria, or simple, such as the outcome of desk research. All in all, what we are trying to avoid here is what famous statistician William Edward Deming used to say: without data, you're just another person with an opinion. This situation is so common in business that it's probably one of the main reasons why many business cases stay on paper. Correctly backing your case will not only be beneficial to push your case forward, but it will also help construct your business persona as a sound executive or entrepreneur. If you feel you should refresh your knowledge on the different types of research that are available, feel free to check out the research type document that we have uploaded to the training materials. As you probably know, data can be either non-existent or, on the opposite end of the spectrum, almost infinite. In our experience, what troubles young executives and entrepreneurs the most is how to balance the trade-off between showing robust data and spending zillions of hours collecting data and analyzing it, which would deviate from the focus of making the case. For this purpose, we'll present you with a framework that will help you to balance this trade-off. The key is neither to overinvest nor underinvest in data collection, but rather adjust efforts based on the type of situation or case you're developing. The framework relies on two different variables: the financial implications of your case and the strategic implications of your case. We will qualify each to ground them a bit further.
To qualify the level of effort you will dedicate to collecting data for your case, the first variable to consider is a very straightforward one: the financial implications of your case. Let us put it this way: if we are counting pennies, why even bother to invest resources in collecting very robust data? As a bare minimum, the financial benefits or implications of your case should be more relevant than the financial investments to obtain the data to support the case. In this context, you can think of the financial implication factor as a continuum with a direct correlation, in which a decision with low financial implications will call for a low effort to collect and process data, while a decision with strong financial implications will call for a more intense effort. Human resources and or branding decisions are examples of cases which may have no direct or indirect financial implications. But those decisions could still be of high importance and call for thorough support. This is because they could relate to the core of the strategy of the business. Almost every important decision in organizations has strategic implications, and this is the second variable to consider. Unlike financial implications, which is very intuitive, this variable is sometimes overlooked, and many executives fall short when it comes to even including this dimension when making the case. In this context, the more the case may change or impact the core of the organization's purpose, business model, or raison d'etre, the more intense effort you would put into strengthening your data collection and analysis. You can plot the two dimensions we just described into a matrix as shown in the slide. This is very powerful and at the same time very simple because it allows you to organize your efforts within a very simple rule. The higher the strategic and financial implications that your case raises, the more effort you should allocate to strengthen your case fact-based backup. This framework is not to be taken in a binary yes or no mode, but rather as a continuum. However, for the sake of a better explanation and exemplification, we have classified 4 different layers of cases, ranging from the simplest in the first layer to the most complex in the 4th layer.
The idea of following the matrix is to avoid both overkills and deficits in your analysis. And you should use your best senses and maybe even do some research to find out what your case represents to the audience in terms of strategic and financial implications. Examples of each layer are selecting a provider of laptop equipment in layer 1, the audience being a purchase department and laptops a minor expense. An entrepreneur's investor pitch for layer 2, the audience being a venture that specializes in the presented startup field. Changing a regional headquarter in layer 3, the audience being a global CEO. And acquiring a growing competitor in level 4, the audience being the board of investors. As you have probably noticed throughout these examples, you should keep in mind the audience when considering the implications of your case. This is because the audience is the target you are attempting to persuade to follow your case, and you should thus consider the impact on them instead of you. This also means that it is imperative that you know your audience well enough to assess the impact of what you are proposing to do. There are 2 main qualifiers that may upgrade or downgrade your case's position within the matrix. These are the type of audience you will present your case to and the stage of development of your case. These qualifiers typically move together if you have done your homework properly, meaning that you would typically present to a senior or important audience in the later stages of your case development. One important qualifier is the type of audience. A formal one, or a very senior one, would likely call for an extra effort. For instance, presenting your recruiting budget to your manager would likely call for a layer 1 case. But the very same case presented to the VC providing your funding may upgrade the case to a layer 2. Another type of qualifier is the stage of development in which you're presenting your case, acknowledging that important and detailed plans or ready-to-implement plans start as high-level ideas. An example of a case evolving in time is a high-level opportunity assessment in layer 1 that evolves into an investment hypothesis in layer 2, that after intense research becomes an investment thesis in layer 3, and that eventually, after due diligence and negotiations, becomes an M&A go-no-go decision in layer 4. Regardless of your assessment, the best practice is to align with your audience or superior the level of effort you will be dedicating, with an upfront proposal whenever possible. And when alignment is not possible, you should try to perform some research on the audience and develop a best guess. To have a more concrete sense of what the possible levels of effort are for different types of cases, we will go through some real case examples in the upcoming videos.
Within the framework that we have presented, we are characterizing 4 different layers. The first layer is the one that requires the lowest level of effort, as the strategic implications and the financial implications of the case being developed are only mild. Within this layer, it is important to avoid overkill, since you will be in a good enough position to defend your case with a small set of data or a simple analysis. A marketing business case for using a certain brand logo in a small product's brand extension is a great example of what we mean by a case that has a clear mild impact. The financial implications of such a decision should be close to marginal, given that the scope of the case is a small brand and that we are not even discussing the brand itself, but a brand extension. The strategic implications, nevertheless, could be much higher depending on various factors, such as the level of comfort and expertise you and your organization have regarding brand extensions. We can find other good layer 1 example within the B2B sales spectrum. The case to adapt your company's offering to meet certain specific client requests. B2B sales typically require some level of customization, so imagine the impact of performing deep analysis every time you need to do one. This is what analysis paralysis stands for in business, and what we are looking to avoid in the first layer of our matrix. We could of course imagine a few situations in which a customization case may require extra effort. For example, when the client that you are selling to is much larger than the rest of your clientele, which would increase the financial implications of the case. Or when the change you are proposing in the offering is very different from what your company typically sells, which would also increase the financial implications of your case, but from the cost side. The last example that we want to use is a case for selecting a provider for laptops for a small team that has been newly created within your company. The strategic implications of this case are exceptionally low, unless of course the team that is receiving laptops is a team of programmers that requires something dramatically different from the rest of the company. The financial implications of this procurement case are also low, as laptops are close to being a commodity these days and price differences are not that large given a certain level of specifications. We will use this last procurement case as the core example to go through some examples of research and analysis you would require when backing up your case.
Imagine that you're making the case to select a certain laptop provider and that you have identified a set of questions and analysis to answer those questions according to what you have learned in Module 1. The first question you want to answer is, how do different providers satisfy your computing needs? And you plan to answer this question by 1. Understanding the needs of the target users of the laptops. 2. Performing a specification comparison of different models that you will later match with the needs. And 3. Understanding different providers' related services such as online support should users have any problems with the equipment. The second question you should answer is, which providers have the most advantageous commercial conditions? And to answer this question, you will 1. Compare price and discounts of providers. 2. Compare financing options. And 3. compare other commercial conditions such as warranty, for example. The last question for which you may want to provide at least a high-level answer is, which providers hold the lowest inherent risk? And to do this, you will quickly 1. Understand the track record of providers, 2. Check for compliance issues, and 3. Analyze other potential risks, such as sustainability of the provider, should you want to select a provider that supplies to you for an extended period. We have all the questions and the analysis laid out, but what is the appropriate level of effort to answer these questions? We will use the first question, which providers have the most advantageous commercial conditions, to exemplify.
If we need to acquire a work tool such as a laptop, the first thing we need to do is understand what it will be used for. The effort that we put into this qualitative analysis can be as low as having a single interview with the designated person at the beginning of the procurement request, for instance, the lead for the new business unit, or as high as performing internal and external surveys to understand in a very detailed manner what people in similar positions require from their computers. Neither of the extremes is appropriate for the task at hand. We recommend always taking things a step further than doing just one single interview and considering it a valid backup as a standalone. If we expand the interviewing effort a small bit, for example, to include some of the actual users of the laptops, we'll most likely reach a sufficient level of understanding of what the equipment will be used for.
Once we are done with the needs, we can move forward to comparing specifications of different potential providers. You could start this analysis by plotting how each model scores on different specifications such as storage, processor, and RAM into a radar graph. This first analysis will not tell you much by itself, but provided that you have a good understanding of what the computer will be used for, you can evolve the analysis to show performance expectations for different software uses. Analogously to the understanding of the needs, you should not go as far as hiring a third-party agency to help you assess each model for such a straightforward case.
Finally, we can include a brief analysis of other related services included in the provider's offer, such as customer support, which could address some of the needs that were identified previously. Again, even though we could perform an in-depth analysis based on third-party reviews and expert advice, in this case, and given that we are in the first layer of our matrix, a brief comparison of services plotted in a radar chart would suffice. Once we have completed 3 or so interviews to understand the needs, developed an analysis of performance to understand the required specifications, and performed a brief radar chart comparison for related services, we are ready to provide an answer to the first question of our period. To round up the analysis, we could develop a provider's ranking based on their ability to satisfy our needs, separating those who are good enough. Finally, in order to be fully prepared to make this case, we'll most likely want to cross-reference this ranking with the answers to the other 2 questions.
If we go through the other 2 questions following a similar process, we will realize that we can get to a sufficiently robust answer to a laptop provider case by just adding a few more simple analyses, such as an economic comparison of providers for the second question and a ranking based on reviews for the third one. All in all, the effort you dedicate to supporting a layer 1 case should not exceed 40 hours or a full week of work. Given the simplicity of this particular case, you really shouldn't dedicate more than 20 hours. Cases that fall within the second layer of the matrix to define the backup needs already require higher levels of effort both because cases in this layer call for more complex analysis or because they call for a larger number of analyses. The strategic implications and the financial implications of layer 2 cases are typically mild to moderate, although they could also be remarkably high on one dimension and exceptionally low on the other, as shown in the chart. A great example of a layer 2 case is an early round investor pitch. Investor pitches are typically positioned at the center of the matrix, as they yield moderate financial implications, given this investment require low amounts of capital but are attached to higher levels of risks, and moderate strategic implications, given the size of the opportunity typically tackled by startups is large. Other examples of layer 2 cases include a financial cost optimization decision for a case with strong financial implications but low strategic implications, and a go-to-market adjustment for a case with strong strategic implications but low financial implications. We will use the investor pitch as the core example to illustrate the types and depths of research and analysis you would require when backing your cases.
Imagine that you're making the case for a venture capital to invest seed capital in your startup, and you have identified a set of questions and analyses that will help you persuade them to do so. The first question you want to answer is, what is the unmet need and how does our value proposition match with that unmet need? So, you plan to answer these questions through 1. Unmet need identification, 2. Value proposition reaction. The second question you most likely want to answer is, what is the opportunity? And to answer this question, you will 1. Develop a market sizing model, 2. Perform a capture feasibility and penetration rates analysis, and 3. Map the competition landscape, including substitutes. Next, you will likely focus on answering what is our plan and team, for which you will include 1. A business model and go-to-market, 2. An operational model, and finally 3. An organizational structure. Finally, you will focus on providing visibility on the expected economics of the investments. And to do this, you will provide 1. Financial projections, 2. Evaluation of the company, and 3. Exit options for your investor with some financial KPIs. We'll now take a closer look at the first 2 questions and discuss the appropriate level of effort you should allocate into each analysis. One of the most important, or even in some cases, the most important success factor of a startup looking to fund its operations is the correct identification of the unmet need. This is because early stage and innovative startups are valued by the need they address, and failing to do this properly carries the risk of making your whole case worthless to potential investors. Moreover, this is where entrepreneurs typically fall short regarding the allocation of effort, assuming that their own experience and a few interviews with stakeholders within their network is enough. As mentioned before, layer 2 cases are still considered to be done at a high level, but some analyses may require more effort, and this is the case for unmet needs identification and a few other analyses within an investor pitch. Anywhere between 20 and 50 interviews with potential target clients and experts in your startup's field is appropriate before jumping into gathering funds. It is worth mentioning that here we are talking about seed funding of a company that shouldn't hold a valuation over 10 million. Otherwise, more interviews and analyses are likely to be required. Needless to say, a properly identified unmet need will not suffice as the only reason why investors will commit funds. They also need to know that the value proposition you have developed will help address that or those needs. The good news is that testing your value proposition has research synergies with identifying the unmet needs. Thus, following the similar methodology and leveraging those 20 to 50 calls with potential clients and experts will also be sufficient for this front.
Contrary to what happens with the understanding of the unmet needs and value proposition reaction, entrepreneurs tend to overinvest when it comes to developing estimation models. An overdeveloped and complex model for an underdeveloped business idea can have negative effects on your credibility. A startup that has not yet sold a minimum viable product should not be focused on calculating the market for multiple revenue streams and dreaming up exaggerated valuations. The idea is not that you undermine the potential of your startup, but rather that you project that you are sound and reasonable by acknowledging the most certain or properly identified market. In this sense, anything between 20 and 50 lines of Excel should be sufficient for this stage. Show that you know the high-level numbers and growth rates of relevant segments of the market. For calculating your potential revenues, a similar concept applies. Even with a set of 20 to 50 interviews to back up your beliefs, it does not make sense for you to overthink this exercise. A basic analysis with high, mid and low probabilities to capture is surely enough for this stage. The rationales of the number that you provide in the estimation is considerably more important than the complexity of the estimation itself.
Cases that fall within the third layer of the matrix represent challenging and impactful analytical efforts. The strategic implications and the financial implications of layer 3 cases are moderate to strong and would typically involve a very senior audience. Within this layer, flawless complex analysis and creative strategic thinking begin to become a must-have. An example of a layer 3 case is changing the regional headquarters of a large corporation. As you can notice, such a decision can have a deep impact in sales, human resources, culture, costs, trade, among many other areas. And even if changing the location of the headquarters makes sense from a business standpoint, the amount of resistance you will face with senior stakeholders that are impacted with the decision is likely to be large, placing even more pressure on the analytical backup of the case. Other examples for layer 3 cases include pruning a relevant product from the portfolio. This would be a case with strong financial implications but moderate strategic implications. Performing a worldwide marketing alliance with another company. This would be a case with strong strategic implications but moderate financial implications. We will use the change in the regional headquarters as the core example to illustrate the types and depth of research and analysis you would require when backing up that type of case.
Imagine that you're making the case to your global CEO to change the location of your region's headquarters, and that you have identified a set of questions and analyses that will help you push forward this project. It is important to note that we will use a simplified version of the pyramid structure you should use to answer this case, given the training purpose of the exercise. The first question you want to answer is, what are the associated costs? And you plan to answer this question through 1. Understanding the delta in the cost of labor. 2. Estimating the property costs of one location versus the other. And 3. Estimating the one-time costs of moving from one location to the other. The second question you should answer is, what efficiencies will we gain? And to answer this question, you will look to understand 1. Proximity to key assets, for example plants, and 2. Connectivity to key partners. Finally, you will focus on answering how functional the change is for headquarters operation. And to do this, you will provide visibility on 1. Availability of key talent, 2. Proximity to key markets, and 3. Connectivity with global headquarters. We will now take a look at the first question and discuss the appropriate level of effort you should allocate into each analysis.
Understanding the delta in cost of labor is relevant, as it will allow you to assess how competitive will one center be against the other. This analysis should eventually be matched with availability of talent and cultural differences to gather an overall HR-driven view. Depending on the headcount size of the regional headquarters versus domestic offices, and on the variety of functions covered in the regional headquarters, estimating the cost of labor can be a challenging task. In this case, if the headcount size and variety of functions of the regional headquarters is low, you should be able to answer to the cost of labor delta by gathering relevant KPIs for each city you're considering, such as average salary for executives, cost of living, and others which are typically easy to find. If the headquarters has a large headcount and a wide variety of functions, you will most probably need to commission a specific detailed study for each function to benchmark salaries alongside talent availability and other variables. In no case, you should fall short and attempt to answer the question with only a few internal data points. The cost of property or rent is also likely to be a major source of difference between locations. Property cost should be matched with availability of appropriate premises and cost related to services to provide an all-encompassing assessment. Similarly to cost of labor, depending on the size and specificities of the premises you need, you can run the analysis either leveraging online data or, if more complex requirements are needed, hiring a real estate agency. The last cost that we will consider is the cost of moving. Needless to say, you will need to work closely with HR, legal, and other departments to work on this. You could eventually structure the exercise into the cost of closing the current office and the cost of opening the new one. For the cost of closing the current office, given that the information with regards to current assets and liabilities is very easy to obtain, this analysis should be done in detail. For the analysis of the new headquarter cost, you can assess the value of rent and office equipment leveraging online data in a relatively simple way. However, estimating the cost of moving key employees from one location to the other should require a more thorough analysis, ensuring that there is collaboration of HR in the process.
We have discussed the analysis to answer one question for the Layer 3 case, and you have probably noticed that the amount of work required is much higher than previous layers. Layer 3 cases are strategically and financially relevant decisions for an organization and should not be taken lightly. Contrary to Layer 2, where the rule was to be high level and eventually identify one or two analyses to deep dive, Layer 3 cases are composed mainly by detailed analysis with one or two exceptions. You should also consider hiring external help to solve one or two fronts of your case. You can expect to spend in between 6 and 12 weeks for a Layer 3 case, beyond the resources required for external support. We will now move into the last layer of our matrix and discuss the required robustness of analysis in business cases with critical impact for the organization. We have now reached the final layer within our matrix. Layer 4 cases are critical business decisions that can surely define the short and long-term success of any organization. Pushing Layer 4 cases typically require analytical excellence, and thus are many times supported by strategy consulting firms, investment banks, law firms, and other advisors. Beyond being analytically challenging, cases in the fourth layer are also politically challenging, as the very top of any organization would be involved and have a say in these decisions. The most straightforward example of a layer 4 case is to acquire a growing competitor. M&A decisions have of course a profound impact on any business, and they are accompanied by a series of similarly important decisions such as how to integrate once acquisition is made, what priorities are for the new resulting company, and so forth. Other examples for layer 4 cases include issuing a corporate bond to finance operations for a case with extraordinarily strong financial implications and strong strategic implications, and changing the company's mission and vision for a case with extraordinarily strong strategic implications and strong financial implications. We will use the M&A case as the core example to illustrate the types and depths of research and analysis you will require when backing that case. It is hard to imagine that you find yourself in a layer 4 case without having walked the path towards it. As discussed at the beginning of this module, cases typically evolve from layer 1 to its final layer following a continuum that answers to the stage of the case. A layer 4 M&A case would have started as a high-level opportunity assessment in layer 1, that evolved into an investment hypothesis in layer 2, that after intense research became an investment thesis in layer 3, that eventually, after due diligence, led to an M&A go-no-go decision in layer 4.
Imagine that you're making the case to your global CEO and the board of investors to acquire a global competitor, and that you have identified a set of questions and analyses that will help you push forward this project. Please note that given the training purpose of the exercise, we will use a simplified version of the pyramid structure you would use to answer this case. The first question you want to answer is, does the acquisition make financial sense? To answer this question, you plan to 1. Perform the NPV and the return on investment analysis. 2. Develop an assessment of gain economies of scale and synergies. The second question you should answer is, does it make strategic sense? And to answer this question, you will look to understand 1. The contribution of the target to your mission and vision. 2. The value creation to clients. And 3. The competitive advantages resulting from the acquisitions. Finally, you will focus on answering how feasible is to go through the M&A process successfully. And to do this, you will provide visibility on 1. The regulatory compliance outlook. 2. The target company willing to sell. And 3. The availability of funds to perform the acquisition. We will now take a closer look at 2 of these analyses to discuss the appropriate level of effort you should allocate to them.
Calculating the financial returns of an investment is critical to make an M&A decision, and when performing these calculations, various scenarios and external opinions are typically considered. This means that developing a robust estimation model by yourself will not be enough for your audience, the board and the CEO, to agree to move forward. Expert advice is required, and thus you will likely engage with investment bankers and other advisors to develop their own estimations and support your case. If you're engaging in M&A, this is probably because you consider that acquiring the selected target contributes to your company's current vision and mission. The contribution could be either by complementing gaps, opening new avenues, or by boosting present capabilities, among others. But when approaching a final go-no-go decision, you should rely on more than your own opinion and publicly available data. Key activities to help reach a sufficient level of certainty include interviewing broadly within the target company, its suppliers, partners and clients to gather an all-encompassing and robust perspective.
Any layer 4 case must be exceptionally robust from an analytical standpoint, and this is why you would typically require lots of external help to achieve an acceptable level. In any case, you need to take into account that even if your analysis is rock solid and the direction of your case is crystal clear, you still have a long way to go to persuade investors and CEOs to take action. As we will see in the next module, even though analyses are relevant, people need emotion to act, and here is when storytelling skills become crucial. Do you remember the 7 steps process? Up until now, we have focused on the first 3 steps, which involved breaking the issue, identifying the governing thought, and developing and validating hypotheses. One could think that once all the case-related structuring and thinking is finished, the case should also be finished. Nevertheless, if we want to persuade other stakeholders to join us and implement our business ideas, we need to develop a communication strategy to conduct our persuasion effort. Steps 4, 5, and 6 all focus on developing the communication strategy and the actual tools we will use to make the case. Although each step refers to a different communication aspect, all 3 steps are highly interconnected and should follow an iterative process. Before we jump into the module's agenda, let me tell you about one essential element to make the case: telling stories. Investors and CEOs come across people attempting to persuade them on a daily basis. They spend hours listening to arguments and interpreting figures that apparently point towards attractive opportunities. Nevertheless, logical reason is not enough for the human brain. We need to be emotionally committed to pursue new opportunities or change the status quo. And that's at the heart of any business decision. Jonathan Haidt, a psychologist from NYU, came up with a great analogy to explain how the human decision-making process works. The story of the elephant and the rider. Haidt argues that our brain has 2 sides: an emotional side, the elephant, and the analytical, rational side, its rider. Even if the rider wants to turn left, the elephant will always have the final say on whether to follow the command or not. This means that even though your logic is flawless, you need to address the emotional elephant that is intrinsic to every human being. A good way to do this is through storytelling. Great stories are simple, easy to remember, and contagious. So using stories will not only help the audience connect with your idea, but will also help other people to share your idea as if they own it.
For instance, even though a hiring manager will look at the qualifications and experience of the various applicants, his final decision will ultimately be driven by feelings such as, I like this person, we get along, she would fit well in here. Therefore, if you're that job applicant, you should have a strong background for the position, but you should also focus on conveying your story properly so that it reveals your true self, your passions, and your interests. A purchasing manager will listen to a variety of sales pitches and weigh the pros and cons of each provider, but will ultimately be moved by feelings of trust, the I believe this guy factor, among other emotions like security or status. In turn, if you are selling, you should tell a story about what really drives you. How are your products or services making a difference, and what does that mean to you? Hence, to make the case, you need to keep in mind what are the driving forces that move your audience and craft your story accordingly. In this module, we'll review how to incorporate storytelling into your case presentations. Does this mean that all the insights, complex analysis, and creative business models are unnecessary? Certainly not. A story without backup is likely to backfire. The point is that organizing those elements into a story will help you persuade your audience more effectively. Let's review now the learning program we have prepared to help you succeed in communicating your case. We have crafted this module to help you develop a set of hard, soft, and mixed skills. Slide writing and storyboarding are related to analytical hard skills and will be covered in the first 2 chapters. Executive summary development and storytelling require a combination of analytical and creative skills,
and are meant to add synthesis and purpose to your case. We will also devote 2 chapters for them. Finally, there is 1 chapter devoted to adjusting your communication according to the political nuances you may be facing.
If you want to create great individual slides, the main concept you need to grasp is the idea of vertical flow. Vertical flow means that the title matches the content of the slide. There needs to be alignment in between the title, which is the main message you want to give to the audience, and the content of the slide, which supports this message. The way to build your slides is from the title down. First, you should decide what is the message you want to convey, and only then define what is the best content to support that message. In certain occasions, when the bridge between the chart and the main message is not so straightforward, you will want to use a kicker. A kicker helps the reader understand why the title is supported by the content using a statement that synthesizes the so what of the content. Let's go through each of these parts of the slide and discuss the best practices you should apply.
Action titles are the most important element of an individual slide. You know you have reached a good action title when it is clear to the reader what the rest of the slide is going to tell him without actually reading the slide. It is called an action title because instead of being merely descriptive, it provides a summary of the main message of the slide, which generally includes a judgment call with regards to what the slide's content means to the reader. An example of an action title could be: there is an opportunity for us to increase the market share of product A by launching a small size presentation. You have probably noticed that the action title is a sentence, and as such, you should only capitalize words at the start of the sentence for the pronoun I and for proper nouns. In contrast to action titles, descriptive titles should be avoided as much as possible. An example of a descriptive title would be market size by presentation size, or market share, volume and value. If your company's templates demand for a descriptive title on top of a slide, you should nevertheless look to make space for an action subtitle that is visible and relevant within the slide. Otherwise, you can use descriptive titles as subtitles within a slide as shown in the example. After defining your title, you should move on to the support section. The support represents the main content of the slide. It can take different forms: a chart, a map, a picture, or just plain text. It can also be an individual element or a combination of several elements. The important thing is for it to directly support the main message on the action title. The type of information will indicate the appropriate form of choice. For instance, a pie chart is often chosen for market shares rather than plain tables. Or if you're showing your marketing strategy for a product, you could use the 4Ps framework. The best practice is of course to use as much charts and images as possible, and reduce extensive text or hard to read tables to the minimum. Whatever shape it takes, the content must follow a pyramid structure and be appropriately styled and formatted as described later in this training. The supporting information should only be what is needed to provide a strong foundation to the main point. Do not include unnecessary or confusing details. This may seem to add value at first, but for someone that has never been exposed to your presentation, unnecessary detail will only deviate from the main message. Complex materials call for you to make an extra simplification effort. You can eventually include other non-message related details in an appendix that you could access during your presentation. Be conscious of the overall story you're telling before you start putting information into your slides. Once the action title is defined, you can take a look at the analysis you have at hand to support that message. As previously discussed, whenever the bridge between the support and the action title is not completely straightforward, you can use a kicker to help build that bridge. It's important to note that kicker should not be an extension of the action title. In our example, a good kicker could state the following: launching a small-sized presentation will enable us to capture a fair share within the market, reaching an additional $5 million revenues. The kicker can often be thought of as answering the question, so what? It should clarify the audience what they are supposed to take away from a given information in the support section. When writing a kicker, it is often helpful to think about the overall case and the role that particular slide is playing within the whole presentation. Ask yourself, what are we trying to say with this slide? Summing up, remember good action titles focus on the slide's main idea. The support section needs to tell the extended story of the action title in a form that is as simple to understand as possible. And when the support section is not easy for a reader to quickly digest, you should use a kicker to help build that bridge faster. Let's now move to a summary of best practices when writing slides.
Investors and CEOs will rarely be persuaded by someone using slappy tools to communicate with them. Thus, we will review best practices that refer to style, tone, flow, graphics, and format in slides. Adopting these best practices in a consistent manner will help your presentation look professional and well-rounded. With regards to style, we recommend that you: first, do not use paragraphs. Develop sentences like a presentation and not like an essay, always aiming to use one idea per bullet. Second, use clear and concise wording. Communicate key ideas in simple, straightforward terms and not leave room for multiple interpretations. Third, use consistent terminology. Utilize the same word and acronym to refer to an entity or variable throughout the entire document. For instance, don't switch alternative terms back and forth. Finally, try to apply the same type of grammatical structure in every bullet. For instance, a verb in the same tense or nouns of the same level of hierarchy. Best practices for tone include using authoritative language, addressing issues directly and conclusively. Using professional sounding business vocabulary. Do not use colloquialisms or fluffy words. Ensuring that business terms are used correctly. A great tip to increase your professional vocabulary is by reading business publications. Using the active as opposed to the passive voice. While in the passive voice the subject is unknown, the active voice there is always a subject performing the action, leaving no room for misinterpretations. Ask yourself who is doing what to whom.
When looking at your presentation's flow, make sure to pay attention to document flow. Focus on telling the story and organize the document logically with key high-level information up front. Section flow. Focus on making a good first impression. Start strong and end strong. When possible, the strongest sections should go first in the document, as this will create a good initial impression in the audience. Page flow. Focus on answering the question. The answer should jump out at the audience and occupy a prominent position in the page. Supporting details should be less prominent. Anticipate questions from the audience and answer them in the support section. Ask yourself, why are bullets in a particular order? Do they reflect any logic? Is it chronological? Is it logical argument? Is it importance of ideas? A suggestion regarding flow is to read only through the titles of your document to check for any breaks in the story flow, and then revise the titles and support to check if it's easy to build a bridge between them. You could do this yourself, or ask someone who is not acquainted with your case to do so. The point is that it should be easy to understand for anyone. Graphics are maybe the best choice when selecting the way to show support content. Graphics work so well because they help your audience pay attention, understand quickly, remember, and even use the information you share with them. So you should actively look for opportunities to use graphics whenever you can, and reduce the use of text or data dumps to the minimum. Take a look at the suggestions in this slide with regards to the most appropriate graphic you can use for different types of data. Lastly, I would like to provide a few guidelines with regards to format. Regardless of the software you're using to communicate, you should look to maintain a clean and consistent format within slides. Some of the key areas to keep in mind are: first, font size for text. You will want to be consistent and use a higher font size for more important parts of the slide, such as the action title or kicker. Second, use of guidelines. As you develop your slides, you will probably use different types of frameworks to convey your messages. You should make sure to adapt the space that each type of section occupies to make it consistent across slides. This will not only make your deck look professional, but will also facilitate the reading and flow of slides. Third, color. As we're looking to make our deck as simple to read as possible, you should refrain to using a defined color palette. Ideally, one that doesn't include big color jumps, nor uses too flashy colors, as this will drive the reader's attention away from what you want to convey to him. The storyboard is the visual outline of a presentation. Thus, storyboarding is the act of developing such outline. You may storyboard in a whiteboard, a notebook, using Post-it, or even in an Excel. As long as the medium allows you to play with ideas in a flexible and interactive way, it will serve its purpose. What really matters is developing the habit of working with the storyboard. Many professionals underestimate the need of storyboarding and rush to develop their presentations by deploying analysis with some level of logic. In fact, we rarely see executives placing too much effort on thinking the order of ideas. However, storyboarding is important because: first, it allows you to play with the order of ideas back and forth. Second, it helps to shape the story you want to tell through trial and error. And third, it helps visualize the look and feel of the overall presentation, such as length, weight of each chapter, balance between analytical and soft issues, among others.
One of the best ways to provide logic to the order of ideas in your presentation is by using what we call the horizontal flow. While vertical flow refers to the connection between an action title and the graph and data within the slide, the horizontal flow refers to the connection among the different action titles of different slides. Horizontal flow is not just an order of chronology or an index. It's the framework that guides the presentation. To achieve a smooth horizontal flow, we need to apply a logic that rules both the order of the slides and the story that connects them. Presentations of management consultant firms are easy to follow precisely because they take the horizontal flow of their presentations quite seriously. And how do management consultants build that horizontal flow? By using the pyramid principle. Let's see how. Let's recap on the spirit of the pyramid logic structure. At the top, you have the governing thought. In the second layer, you have the main supporting ideas. And in the third layer, the sub-supporting ideas. Remember that ideas should be organized in a logical order of hierarchy. Ideas in the same horizontal level should have similar levels of abstraction. There should be only one idea per box. And finally, the whole pyramid should follow the MISI concept. This slide shows the connection between the pyramid and the horizontal flow. While the pyramid organizes ideas in a pyramid shape that refers to the hierarchy of each idea, the horizontal flow displays that very same organization in a sort of an outline. Let's deep dive into it. In the pyramid, you see the governing thought at the top, the A, B, and C as the major ideas, and the numbers 1 through 7 as the minor ideas. In the right, you can see how the pyramid translates to an horizontal flow. The governing thought would be the title. The major A would be the first section, with minors 1 and 2 as slides. The major B would be the second section, with minors 3 and 4 as slides, and so forth. Remember that the governing thought answers to the question, what should we do? And hence is the core message of your business case. By following the pyramid structure, the storyboard will tell you the rationale of the recommendation through the so whats of each section and each individual slide. Here we have an example of the document structure following the pyramid principle. In this case, we use a PowerPoint, but we could have used a notebook with the very same purpose, which is to develop and validate the horizontal flow. The layout allows us to see that there is a governing thought, major ideas, and minor ideas. The major ideas, in fact, represent sections of the document and are composed by minor ideas, which represent slides. The first slide of this illustrative document is the executive summary, or the agenda page. The governing thought is the action title, and the majors A, B, and C are the main supporting reasons that support that governing thought. Note that majors A, B, and C are also the titles of other big sections. Also note that the major A is not only supporting the executive summary's governing thought, but is also the action title of the next slide. That same dynamic occurs with the other major and minor sections. It's in this way that the pyramid logic structure allows the horizontal flow to be organized in a kind of a cascading effect.
This is a typical storyboard structure. First, you have a title page, in which the case should be stated or at least somehow introduced. Right after the title page, there should always be an executive summary slide. The bulk of the document is usually organized in sections that contain the outcome of research and analysis. Be aware that sections within the document should be organized following a key message logic and not by following an area of analysis logic. Best practices encourage the development of this type of layout in which you can have an holistic view of the document and arrange or rearrange slides following the pyramid principle. This is allocating slides or analysis in the sections where they belong. From a tactical perspective, there are several ways of developing a storyboard, but the common theme is to develop a first draft and then begin to play with it as if you were solving a puzzle. On one side, some people place time management at the beginning of the process. They organize themselves in a time per slide modus operandi and then think the number of slides they need. On the other side, many people draft slides on paper or on in PowerPoint. In this case, we suggest not to devote too much time in building individual slides, but rather sketching them to visualize the whole story. Many times you will be tempted to use what we call pre-existing material. These are slides you may have developed for other purposes or even work-in-progress slides. It's fine to recycle as long as you can adapt the content to support the messages that you want to convey. Make sure you're not doing it the other way around, since you can be compromising the messages. In conclusion, build the storyboard first and only then assess up to what extent those pre-existing slides fit into the original storyboard. It's always better to have a good story and a persuasive logic set than changing it for the sake of saving a pre-existing nice slide.
Whenever you make the case, you should always start with your recommendation or conclusion, which is the governing thought, and then build your storyboard around answering the why for such recommendation. The principle here is that you anticipate your governing thought at the beginning of the presentation and then spend the rest of it explaining why you say so. For instance, the ideas and the facts supporting your case. A very common pitfall among young executives is to maintain the governing thought as secret until the end of a presentation. Contrary to what many people think, senior managers, CEOs, and investors are not happy when there's a kind of a suspense around your recommendation or conclusion. In fact, senior executives are expecting you to deliver the message right away and then spend some time justifying that statement. Therefore, you should take into account these expectations when you develop your document. This type of storyboarding strategy will also help you during your presentation from a time management perspective. If you notice that the audience already agrees with the governing thought, you might spend less time presenting the related underlying and supporting facts, and vice versa. You may devote more time on the most conflicting ones. This is another good reason for you to provide a thorough thinking effort to your storyboarding process. A good way to start an executive summary is to think what you want to achieve in your presentation, which means envisioning what you would call success after the meeting. This will enable you to think of what you want to happen during the presentation, and in turn, think much better the messages that you want to deliver. Think it as a guide for the document. You may think now that this contradicts what we have reviewed in the storyboarding section. If we already strategized the message during our storyboarding exercise, isn't the development of the executive summary somehow redundant? Well, as we mentioned at the very beginning, storyboarding and development of executive summaries is a highly iterative process, and many people adapt the storyboard as a consequence of having powerful executive summaries, and others do it the other way around. First, they develop the storyboard, and then they adapt the executive summary, adjusting the key messages accordingly. Have you heard about the elevator pitch? This concept refers to a hypothetical situation where an executive meets the CEO in the elevator, and the CEO asks how the project is going. The response time for the executive is between 20 and 30 seconds. Those seconds could leave the CEO with the impression that the executive is doing a great job, or even better, eager to know more about it. In a presentation, the executive summary is the analog to the elevator pitch, and for that reason, it is perhaps the most important part of your presentation. The executive summary synthesizes the case so that readers can rapidly become acquainted with a large body of information without having to go through all of it. Most likely, you have already developed and read many executive summaries, either in academic or work settings. Hence, in this video, we will just focus on sharing industry best practices about leveraging the pyramid principle and the horizontal flow concepts to think and design compelling executive summaries.
There are two ways of approaching an executive summary: by synthesizing and by summarizing. Despite being called an executive summary, best practices suggest not to summarize, but rather to synthesize. While a summary is a condensed statement of all the facts and the analysis you have done, it does not necessarily project neither insights nor implications. Using the analogy with the elevator pitch, the CEO may be either bored or indifferent if that approach is followed. A synthesis, on the other hand, is a short statement that tackles what your case implies to the audience. It pushes the thinking further towards the famous "so what" and allows to use the pyramid principle to back your argument.
The executive summary sets the tone and objective of your presentation. It's obviously a critical stage for you to make the case. The executive summary helps you achieve three objectives. First, raise the audience attention. Second, prepare the audience for the content. And third, anticipate the audience for sensitive issues. Remember that your audience doesn't want any unexpected news, and the executive summary should help you to avoid surprises. In the executive summary, you're basically telling your audience what they are going to see and what they should take away from it. Think of it like a movie trailer, but without caring about the spoilers.
In this slide, you can see an example of an executive summary to the left, and to the right you have the slides that follow that summary. There is a flawless connection between the action titles of the different slides and the executive summary. In fact, they are the very same sentences. As with this example, in a perfect pyramid principle setting, the executive summary would be the sum of all of the action titles you have in your presentation slides. If you recall, we also went through this concept during our storyboarding video when we reviewed the link between the governing thought, major ideas, and minor ideas. This relates to what we already talked before. If you focus on the left side of the slide and you see the title right up there, that is the actual case you want to make. In this example, it's saying, hey, we could capture this opportunity. And then all of the supporting facts within the executive summary support that statement. Each of those supporting facts help to tell the story by answering the why this market is attractive. Remember, the main supporting statements of your case, which are upfront in the executive summary, will then become the main sections and slides of your document. Now that we learned the foundations that will help us develop a storyboard and an executive summary, let's discuss in our next video how to include storytelling to your case.
Within businesses, storytelling happens at multiple levels. Brands have stories. Business development efforts have stories. Visions and missions tell stories. You may think that stories are mainly used by companies to communicate and engage with customers or external parties. But as you will see, stories are used in organizations and are the most successful communication method. It's not different when you make the case. Using stories to persuade is an old and effective tradition that can help you unlock the resources you need to make your case a reality. The most important thing about storytelling is connecting, so developing stories requires for you to appeal to feelings, and most importantly, purpose. A good story for your business case should have several elements. You typically begin with a roadmap, which is the executive summary. This is the section where you tell them what you're going to tell them. Then you can set the stage by describing the problem. Once the problem is defined, you can outline your approach or methodology in order to build credibility. This is what we did to solve the problem part of the story. Moving on, you should continue by outlining the results of what you did, which may come in the form of findings, product performance, or others. One of the most important parts to help readers connect with your story is the what it all means section. This is where you would explain how you interpret the results and make conclusions. Having dazzled your audience with the previous sections and with the motivations running high, it's the perfect time to talk about what we need to do. Generally, if you're making a case, you're probably looking to gather funds or other types of support to make your case a reality, and the final stage will be the appropriate time to ask for that.
Let me provide you with an example. If we are working with a beverages company that is facing trouble with its portfolio, we could say the following. Consumers are shifting from drinking carbonated beverages, where most of our portfolio and profit pool lies, to drinking still beverages, which have lower margins and where we don't have any products. And this is happening at a pace that is hurting our top and bottom line. Thus, we analyze the market for 150 still beverages, looking for easy to launch and high margin products. We realized that within still beverages, the category of dairy beverages, such as yogurt drinks, hold margins comparable to those of carbonates and have the necessary critical mass for a corporation to effectively compete. This means that if we acquire a mid-sized milk plant, we could launch nationally in less than 1 year and revert the trend, reaching up to an additional $500 million revenues and $100 million profit. In consequence, we want to engage with investment banks to begin an M&A effort to acquire a milk plant, for which we would need an initial budget of $100K for scanning and evaluation of potential acquisition targets. Using a different example, imagine you're an entrepreneur or part of a startup scouting for investment for a new product you invented. You could be in seed, series A, B, or C round. It doesn't matter. The fact that you need to shape your pitch into a story applies even when you're using something as simple as a Kawasaki framework. Let's say that it's 2008 and you're launching a new app to compete with cabs. We will use Uber's first pitch deck example published by Garrett Camp, one of Uber's founders, to reinforce our point. Most of cabs use aging and inefficient technology, and hailing is done by hand or by phone. Taxi monopolies reduce the quality of service, and digital hail could now make street hail unnecessary. We created a fast and efficient on-demand car service concept. These cabs would be hailed digitally by members using just one click. The value proposition is highly differential, as you can ensure a premium service to a respectable members-only clientele with fast response times and a high-tech solution. In a realistic scenario, we could capture 5% market share of the top 5 US cities, generating 20 to 30 million profit per year. We will focus on San Francisco and New York City to begin, and then expand to LA, Chicago, Houston, Pennsylvania, and Dallas, covering 50% of US market. In the short term, we will raise a few million to buy 3 cars, develop the app, and launch a demo on February the 1st. Both examples have something in common. They correspond to high-end investment decisions. Nevertheless, stories can and should be used to persuade at other levels.
We have listed 5 approaches towards developing stories that apply to a vast variety of situations you may face at work and that do not necessarily relate to investments. These are: 1. The insight-driven approach, to be used when the final goal is to show best practices, key learnings, insights, or a best approach to face a certain situation. 2. The section-driven approach, to be used when the final purpose is to show learnings across multiple non-related work streams. 3. The conclusion recommendation-driven approach, to be used when the storyline leads to a single recommendation or conclusion. This is the one that is usually used for investments as well. 4. The workshop discussion-driven approach, to be used when the final purpose is to conduct a discussion to arrive at a decision, particularly if alignment across multiple stakeholders is needed. In this case, you do not directly make the recommendation. We will also cover this topic with more detail in our next module. 5. The Workplan different work streams update approach. This is usually used in interim or mid-progress reviews when there's a need to also convey an overview of status of activities and implications. We will now go through one by one of these storytelling approaches and review a business example for each of them. The insight-driven approach refers to a story used to convey a learning experience. It can easily become the perfect fit to persuade on strategic choices within businesses. If your goal is to explain why a specific logic-driven choice is taken, this type of story may be the perfect one for you to provide some level of sentiment to your rationale. Let's imagine that you're a marketing manager of a certain product. let's say a computer, and based on last year's marketing campaign results, you want to convince your superiors to give you the green light to launch a completely different campaign. You could structure a story as follows. In this apparently straightforward marketing decision, the executive summary could have been somehow dry. However, by adding storytelling to the executive summary, we enabled some level of empathy and connection building with the audience. Additionally, we improved the way we appeal to the emotional side in the decision-making process.
This section-driven approach can be useful to summarize a diverse set of recommendations for different areas to achieve a common goal or objective. In the section-driven approach, different areas may share the problem part of the story and maybe one other of the elements, but the results part is generally divergent for each section. Using our previous example with the shifting consumer base for the computer company, we could easily infer that a situation as such would have implications that go beyond marketing campaigns. So let's imagine now that you're the business unit lead for laptops and desktops and that you need to make the case for changing several areas of your business given the shifting preferences of customers. Take some time to read through the example. Differently to the marketing-only example, as business unit leads, we would like to push several actions that build towards a common goal but are different between them. Therefore, we should structure our executive summary accordingly and have a specific spot for each section. The conclusion or recommendation-driven approach is used when a single option appears to be the only possible solution for a problem. You should use this approach when other options were considered but are clearly less attractive or unfeasible to implement. The beverages example that we reviewed at the beginning of the storytelling chapter can easily fit this scenario. Let's review it once again and watch out for a relevant variation. You can see that we added a bullet point in between bullets number 3 and number 5, which is key to make our audience knowledgeable that other options were considered and deemed suboptimal versus drinkable yogurts. When a single recommendation is the only option you want to push forward, being outspoken about the rationale is a must, and that rationale would generally carry that other options are not as great as the one that you're pushing. The workshop-driven approach is the opposite from the conclusion-driven approach, as it should be used when several options appear to be a good fit. Maybe this is the case because an option is just as good as another one, or maybe one option has some traits that are different from others. In our Managing Politics video, we will discuss when it is appropriate to use a workshop dynamic using an alternative perspective. But in the meantime, take a few minutes to read through the beverages examples with one important variation that makes a story fit into a workshop. As you have probably noticed, having several beverage categories that seem equally attractive for a company to compete in calls for the session to be introduced as a workshop right away in the executive summary. And thus, the last two bullets also introduce to the objectives and agenda of the day.
The work-plan-driven approach is generally useful to tell a story of progress across work firms. This may be your go-to approach if you're presenting interim results of longer projects and when it's too soon to share insights or recommendations. Yes, you should look to include storytelling even when you're presenting interim results, as it will allow your audience to better retain the level of progress and help you to avoid misunderstandings. As opposed to previous examples, the work-plan-driven approach does not follow the traditional story elements. Read through this last example and we will discuss the nuances afterwards. You can see that the work-plan-driven approach looks completely different as it tries to tell a brief story for each of the fronts in which we want to communicate an update. The brief story you tell is composed by three elements: status of last meeting, progress since last meeting, and objectives for today. This type of scheme will allow you to comprehensively cover several fronts in one single synthesized progress story. To close this chapter, we would like to link the different types of storytelling approaches according to the level of progress of your case. If we think of a case development as a continuum, we believe that the storytelling should be incorporated almost from the get-go. Even in the early stages of your case, you should incorporate basic storytelling such as the one discussed in the work-plan-driven approach. As you progress, you may move to a workshop-driven approach or an insight-driven approach, and ending with a recommendation-driven approach farther down the line. Many times, we see stories that use metaphors connected to the day-to-day life, stories that resemble novels or movies. Those ones would obviously increase your persuasion. However, they're extremely hard to achieve. Our advice is that you use more simple storytelling approaches, such as the ones we reviewed in this chapter. These ones, as you saw, are much easier to develop and will certainly worth the effort. Preparing your case with care, providing the logical structure, and shaping it into a story is critical for success. However, it's not enough. As we said before, there are rarely inevitable truths in business, and business actions have several implications, sometimes very obvious and others not so much. Hence, recommendations almost always bring some level of conflict. One person is rarely 100% sure about a course of action. Most likely there are pros and cons floating in someone's head before being persuaded. And if the audience is a group, you can make sure that conflict will multiply exponentially. Therefore, managing the level of conflict upfront when you make the case is a must. In this section, we will provide you a framework to help you deal with different scenarios. The framework we will refer to has two axes. The first axis measures the level of confidence you have on results. To assess confidence levels, you have to ask yourself questions such as: how robust is the data I am presenting? Is it extrapolated or is it triangulated by multiple sources? How sensible are outputs to input variations? Does the result change a lot if I increase a parameter slightly? What's the level of the logical strength of your conclusions? Up to what extent the conclusions are straightforward? Being honest with the level of confidence you have on results will paradoxically allow you to convey more confidence than if you pretend everything is perfectly backed up. The second axis measures the level of conflict that your recommendation will generate. To assess conflict levels, you have to understand the audience. Remember that conflicts may arise for a reason that transcends your analysis. Most of the times, you will not be able to test the reaction to your case on a one-by-one basis. Furthermore, there could be unexpected people within the audience. So, it is a best practice to test the waters first whenever you're going to deliver a case. And you need to anticipate potential conflicts by any means possible. Many times, the best way to test the conflict that your case causes is to take into account the motivations and interests of other people and try to imagine what could be in their minds.
Based on these two factors, there are different kinds of strategies that you can follow to manage the case from a political perspective. Depending on the level of conflict and the level of confidence, we have identified 5 potential scenarios. Let's begin with the first one. If you feel very confident about your case and there is no risk of conflict, then go straight forward to the recommendation or conclusion. This materializes in being very straightforward in the executive summary, only deep diving on relevant analysis, and presenting the implications and next steps of your case right away. As you probably noted, the story that this executive summary tells is very assertive and goes straight to the point. It doesn't detour to explain neither methodologies nor quantitative backups, neither deviates to propose discussions. Again, when confidence is high and conflict is low, you should go straight forward to the recommendation and move to the next steps promptly. Let's say you're feeling very confident about your case, but that you anticipate conflict. In this type of situation, the worst thing you could do is to hide it. To the contrary, best practices are just being outspoken about conflict in the executive summary. For instance, if you have reached a conclusion, but there are several organizational implications that may not be necessarily welcome, that per se could be a very powerful story. So tell that story in the executive summary and develop an agenda that prepares for a discussion surrounding the issue. In this case, you can use frameworks displaying different scenarios and focus the discussion on selecting the scenario that the audience feels more comfortable with. Of course, this situation will call for a different storytelling and storyboarding strategy for your case. Hence, make sure to adapt the executive summary, the storyboard, and the selection of slides accordingly. In our illustrative example, you're an entrepreneur presenting a case to raise funds for your own premium bicycles company. You have assessed the Chinese market and it looks attractive from every angle. It seems like a no-brainer. However, you have spoken with different members of the venture capital that is backing you, and many are skeptical of the opportunity provided the risk embedded in such a venture, for example, lack of local knowledge, cultural differences, among others. Again, take a few minutes to read through the executive summary. Compared to the previous executive summary, in this situation we have developed entry options provided the conflict that was previously identified. Note that the way this summary is worded points towards a discussion rather than towards a course of action. This is the way to go whenever you foresee conflict regarding a business decision.
Let's say you do not feel very strong about data, but on the other hand, you predict low levels of conflict. In this situation, you can be very straightforward about your recommendation in the executive summary, but you should also be explicit about the level of robustness of data. Even more, you should anticipate to the audience the data gaps you have and discuss options to close them. It's also a best practice to associate each option with the level of effort required, so as to align next steps. For instance, suppose you have been requested to assess a new client sales potential. For example, how much they are going to purchase, what type of products, with what level of frequency, and so forth. In this case, let's assume that the client is a private company and that the availability of data is low. As a consequence, you built a model with plenty of assumptions and have only been able to triangulate some of them. As a result of your analysis, you estimated the sales potential of that client around 35 million. However, your outputs have high variability, ranging between 10 and 70 million. In this type of situation, an executive summary could look like the following one. Take a few minutes to read carefully. In this example, we can observe that the tone leaves no room for questioning with regards to the attractiveness of the client. But at the same time, it is transparent about the lack of robustness of data. As a note, it's better when you display options that do not entail a right or wrong ambivalence, but rather what you have to believe to prefer that option.
This scenario is somehow tricky for you to make a strong case, since you have a mid-level of confidence on your data inputs and you anticipate some level of conflict with your recommendation. In this situation, you may want to position your case as a work in progress or pre-final version. As in scenario 3, we suggest that you allow for a discussion and prepare dynamics to foster alignment. Imagine that a cement company is looking to assess a retail go-to-market strategy and that you have been assigned to do so. Let's say you know upfront that some executives are fearing some level of cannibalization with traditional channels, and on top of that, you base your analysis on very few data points. Take a few minutes to read through an executive summary that could mimic this situation. You can see that this summary has a cautious tone, but on the other hand, it is stating that the case looks favorable, anticipating some initial conclusions to the audience. In addition, it does recommend some actionable steps, lowering the feeling of going nowhere and reducing the audience anxiety.
Finally, let's talk about the fifth scenario, in which you have low levels of confidence regardless the level of conflict. It's likely that in these type of occasions, you're actually beginning the whole exercise and testing it prior to rolling out the effort. Data might be scarce, be unreliable, and the approach to the exercise may still need to be refined. In these situations, first and foremost, consider reducing the time of the presentation. If your case is far from being strong, why take in that much time of the audience after all? Second, focus on the methodology and process prior to portray any type of insight. This is the perfect moment for you to validate the approach towards data gathering and research. Aligning the methodology and validating it could be your main goal in these type of occasions. Finally, when presenting your findings, even though they could be preliminary, make an attempt to think about which direction they are pointing to. Don't be shy about speaking up preliminary implications. It's always better to express your opinion than leaving the audience with the effort to think and develop their own opinions from scratch. For instance, let's say that you have been assessing the attractiveness of a new drug in the over-the-counter segment. The drug is somehow disruptive, targeting a condition not very well known. In that context, you decided to interview pharmacy clerks to explore the opportunity. Nevertheless, very few of them are proving to be knowledgeable and provide complete answers to your questions. So far, you have done 15 interviews, yet only 3 were fully useful. An executive summary of this situation could look like this. Take a few minutes to read carefully through it. This summary helps the audience to be aware of the relative weakness of the results and at the same time provides visibility about what is going on from a process and a results perspective. This is very important since the audience may be willing to provide valuable suggestions for you to continue building your case. We have reviewed 5 scenarios and we already noticed that each of them call for a different communication strategy. Determining in which scenario you are is not an easy task, so make sure you devote quality time to know your position. Again, this might be the most important consideration for you to persuade and successfully make your case. We have now arrived to the end of the training. We are confident that gaining awareness of the key concepts of case structuring, hypothesis validation, and workplan and game planning will help you to enhance your level of strategic thinking.
We also believe that exploring the trade-offs of efforts allocated in research and analysis will help you to be more effective to execute the plan. Finally, we are sure that including storytelling techniques and strategizing your communication will allow you to optimize the positioning of your case, and hence your capability to persuade.
Applying all these practices may be challenging the next time you need to make a case. But do not feel intimidated. It's like riding a bicycle. As you gain familiarity, you will begin to apply them even without noticing it.
We hope you have enjoyed this journey. Thank you for your participation and stay tuned for other The Mindco Academy trainings.